The music was a physical thing, a wave of polished sound that washed over the marble floors and gilded walls of the great hall, yet failed to touch the cold stone of dread in Alara's stomach. She stood in her usual place, a shadowed alcove between a tapestry depicting a long-dead king and a pillar that smelled of dust and time. From here, she could see without being truly seen, a ghost at the feast of the living. It was a skill she had perfected over 5 miserable years. 5 years since Lord Valerius had cast her aside in this very hall, his laughter the cruelest note in a symphony of her humiliation. He had declared her scent a barren field, her spirit a flickering candle in a gale. The court, ever a flock of vultures circling weakness, had feasted on his words. Since that day, she was the rejected, the broken Omega. A cautionary tale whispered behind gloved hands. Her dignity was an armor she polished each morning, a brittle breastplate of quiet composure. She held her head high, met the pitying glances with a placid mask, and endured the sneers as if they were nothing more than a passing breeze. But beneath the armor, her heart was a frantic bird, beating its wings raw against the cage of her ribs. It remembered everything. It felt every sting. Tonight was the Equinox Gala, the apex of the social season, a night of alliances and claims. A night designed for exquisite torture. The air was thick with a miasma of competing scents, heady alpha musk, sweet omega blooms, all mingling with the perfume of hothouse flowers and beeswax candles. To Alara, whose own scent was a faint, apologetic whisper of rain-dampened lavender, it was overwhelming. It was a constant, suffocating reminder of her own lack. A barren field. She smoothed a hand down the dark wool of her gown, the fabric simple and unadorned. It was the best she owned, but against the jewel-toned silks and velvets of the other Omegas, it was a declaration of her status. Or lack thereof. A small, bitter observation, a familiar defense. If she acknowledged the wound, perhaps it would hurt less. It never did. A ripple of deference spread through the crowd, a sudden hush that cut through the chatter. Heads turned. Backs straightened. Alara didn't need to look to know. There was only one presence in the northern court capable of commanding such silent, absolute reverence. Queen Lyra. The alpha of alphas. She moved not like a woman, but like the embodiment of winter's sovereignty. Her silver hair was intricately braided with threads of moonstone, catching the light from the 1,000 chandeliers. She wore the deep blue of a twilight sky, her bearing regal and remote. She had ruled alone for 2 decades, ever since her own mate had fallen in a border skirmish, and she had never looked upon another. She was a monument of duty and solitude, beautiful and terrifyingly complete on her own. Alara's traitorous heart gave a painful lurch. Every Omega, broken or not, felt that pull. It was an instinct, ancient and undeniable. The queen's scent cut through the cloying sweetness of the room, clean and sharp, like frost on pine needles, the promise of the first snow. It wasn't aggressive or dominating like other alphas. It was vast and calm, a force of nature that simply was. It did not make Alara feel small. It made her feel still. As the queen ascended the dais to her throne, her gaze swept the hall. For a fraction of a second, a sliver of eternity, those cool gray eyes seemed to meet Alara's. It was impossible. A fantasy. A flicker of candlelight in a gale. Alara's breath caught, and she immediately looked down at her own hands, her knuckles white where she gripped the worn fabric of her dress. Hope was a poison. She had learned that lesson with Valerius. She would not drink of it again. The queen was looking at her subjects, at the glittering tapestry of her court. Alara was just a loose thread at the edge, barely part of the picture. To imagine anything more was a fool's errand, a direct path to a pain deeper than the one she already knew. She forced her breathing to even out, reconstructing her armor piece by piece. The queen was an abstract concept of power. Alara was a concrete reality of shame. The two could never intersect. An hour bled into another. Alara remained in her alcove, a statue of resignation. She watched Omegas blush and preen as Alphas brought them glasses of spiced wine, their scents tangling in the air in blatant courtship. Each interaction was a small paper cut against her soul. She felt a presence beside her and stiffened, the instinct to flee warring with the need to appear unbothered. Still haunting the shadows, Alara. The voice was silk-wrapped steel. Lord Valerius. Of course. The architect of her ruin never missed an opportunity to survey his handiwork. He stood there, impossibly handsome in his crimson doublet, a different Omega on his arm, a girl named Kala, whose rose and honey scent was the talk of the season. Kala looked at Alara with a mixture of pity and triumph. Alara inclined her head, a shallow, regal gesture she'd copied from the queen. My lord, her voice was a low murmur, betraying none of the acid churning in her gut. The wolf inside her, the shriveled, wounded thing that passed for her instinct, wanted to snarl. It wanted to claw at that smug, perfect face. But she was not a wolf. She was a broken thing in a wool dress. I'm surprised you still attend these functions, Valerius continued, his tone conversational, as if discussing the weather. It must be so disheartening. He wanted a reaction. He wanted tears, a tremor in her voice, anything to validate his power over her. She would rather die. She gave him a small, empty smile. One must observe one's duties to the crown. His eyes narrowed. Her composure always irritated him. He preferred his victims to weep. He gestured vaguely at her. That scent. It's a tragedy, truly. Like a song half forgotten, he leaned in, a conspiratorial whisper that carried to a dozen nearby ears. Have you considered the southern monasteries? I hear they have a place for unclaimable Omegas. Each word was a hammer blow against her carefully constructed armor. Unclaimable. The word echoed in the sudden, ringing silence in her ears. The music, the laughter, it all faded away. There was only that word, ugly and final. Her heart, that foolish bird, finally went still. He had won. He had found a crack in the breastplate and slid the knife in. Before she could formulate a response, to retreat or shatter completely, a new scent washed over them. Frost and pine. Clean and absolute. Lord Valerius. The queen's voice was not loud, but it cleaved the air. Valerius and his Omega spun around, their eyes wide. Kala dropped into a deep, trembling curtsy. Valerius bowed so low his nose nearly touched his knee. Queen Lyra stood not 5 feet away. She had left her throne. Unheard of. Her gaze was fixed on Valerius, her expression unreadable ice. You find my court disheartening? And no, your majesty. Of course not. A misunderstanding, he stammered, his alpha bravado dissolving into pathetic groveling. He shot a venomous glare at Alara, as if this were her fault. The queen's eyes slid from him to Alara. That gaze, which had felt like a fantasy from across the hall, was now a physical weight. It pinned her to the spot. It saw through the wool dress, through the brittle armor, and straight into the terrified, broken thing cowering inside. Alara felt stripped bare. She could do nothing but dip her head, her neck aching with the effort of holding back a sob. She waited for the dismissal, for the queen to turn away and leave her to her shame. Instead, the queen took a step closer. The court was watching. Oh, gods, the entire court was watching. This was a new and terrible level of humiliation. To be the center of a royal reprimand. Leave us, the queen said, her voice soft, but it was a command that brooked no argument. Valerius practically scrambled over his own feet to obey, dragging Kala with him. The space they vacated was filled with a silence that was louder than any music. It was just Alara and the queen, standing in a pocket of stillness while 100 pairs of eyes stared. Alara kept her head bowed. Your Majesty, she whispered, the words tasting like ash. I apologize for the disturbance. Lift your head, child. The command was gentle. So gentle it terrified her. Slowly, reluctantly, she obeyed. She met the queen's eyes. Up close, they weren't just gray. They were the color of a winter storm cloud, shot through with flecks of silver. They held no pity. They held something else. Something she couldn't dare to name. I have seen you, the queen said, her voice a low murmur meant only for Alara. I have seen you for 5 years. Standing in the shadows, wearing your pain like a crown. Alara's breath hitched. Her armor was gone. It had evaporated under that steady, knowing gaze. She was just Alara. Trembling. Exposed. The queen's gaze flickered to the spot where Valerius had stood. He called your scent a barren field, it was not a question. He is a fool. A field that lies fallow is not barren. It is resting, gathering its strength. A strangled noise escaped Alara's throat. This was a dream. A cruel, beautiful dream from which she would wake up in her cold, lonely bed. The queen took another step, closing the distance between them until the cool air radiating from her person touched Alara's skin. The scent of pine and winter was no longer just a scent, it was an atmosphere, a world. It wrapped around Alara's faint, trembling lavender, not overpowering it, but shielding it. They do not see you, the queen continued, her eyes holding Alara's captive. They see a story someone else wrote for you. They do not deserve to see the truth. What truth? Alara's mind screamed. The truth that she was so desperately lonely she felt hollow? The truth that she dreamed of a touch that wasn't cruel? As if hearing her thoughts, the queen lifted a hand. The motion was slow, deliberate. It gave Alara every chance to flinch away, to retreat back into her familiar misery. But she was frozen, mesmerized by the impossible tenderness in the Alpha Queen's expression. The gloved fingers came to rest on her cheek, the leather cool against her hot skin. A shudder racked Alara's frame. It was the first gentle touch she had known in 5 years. And then the horn sounded, signaling the start of the rite of acknowledgement. The formal part of the evening where claims were made public, bonds declared before the throne. The queen's hand dropped, and the loss of contact was a physical blow. Of course, the moment was over. It had been a fleeting, inexplicable kindness. A queen's whim. Queen Lyra turned and walked back toward the dais without a backward glance. The court's attention snapped with her, a collective exhalation of held breath. The show was over. The broken Omega had had her moment in the royal sun and was now returned to her shadow. Alara pressed herself back against the cold pillar, her cheek burning where the queen had touched her. Her heart, which had been so still, was now a wild, chaotic drum. That single touch had undone years of careful self-preservation. It had planted a seed of hope so ferociously powerful it felt like agony. She watched as the rite began. Alphas led their chosen Omegas before the throne. Lord Valerius, recovering his swagger, made a great show of presenting a shimmering diamond necklace to Calla, who beamed and offered her throat for assenting. The court applauded politely. A few people shot triumphant, pitying looks toward Alara's alcove. This was the final nail. The public affirmation of her replacement. The pain was sharp, but it was distant now, muffled by the impossible memory of the queen's touch. One by one, the pairs were announced. The evening was drawing to a close. Alara told herself to be grateful. The torture was almost over. She could slip away soon, back to her small, empty rooms, and try to forget the scent of winter and the feel of cool leather on her skin. She would have to build a new armor, a stronger one. This one had been compromised beyond repair. Then a hush fell again. The final pairing had been announced, but the queen had not dismissed the court. She remained seated on her throne, her silver-shot gaze sweeping over the assembled nobles. A tension coiled in the air. Something was not finished. Queen Lyra rose. For the second time that night, she descended the steps of the dais. She moved with purpose, a silver wolf cutting through a field of startled sheep. The crowd parted before her as if by magic. She did not look left or right. Her eyes were fixed. On Alara's alcove. On her. Alara's blood turned to ice water. This could not be happening. It was a nightmare. She was going to be publicly banished for distracting the queen, for being the cause of a scene. She looked for an escape, but she was trapped, pinned by 100 stares and the inexorable advance of their sovereign. The wolf inside her whimpered, pressing itself to the floor of her soul. The queen stopped directly in front of her. The hall was so quiet Alara could hear the frantic beat of her own heart. It was the only sound in the world. Queen Lyra looked at her, and for the first time, Alara saw past the regal calm. She saw a flicker of something that looked like vulnerability, like a deep, old loneliness that mirrored her own. Alara, the queen said. Her voice was clear and steady, ringing through the cavernous silence. She did not use a title, just her name. It felt like a song. Alara couldn't speak. She could only stare, her whole being focused on the Alpha before her. For 20 years, the Queen said, her voice resonating with a profound, aching truth that stunned the court, this throne has been cold. For 5 years, I have watched you stand in the shadows, and I have seen not weakness, but a strength that puts every preening Alpha in this hall to shame. A collective gasp went through the room. Valerius's face was a mask of incredulous fury. They say you are broken. The Queen's voice dropped, becoming an intimate murmur that was somehow still audible to everyone. They say your scent is a whisper. She lifted her hand again, not to Alara's cheek this time, but to the pulse point on her neck. Her touch was a brand of ice and fire. They are fools. They have simply forgotten how to listen. And then, before the entire northern court, Queen Lyra leaned in. She did not just send her. It was not the polite, public ritual of the other Alphas. She buried her face in the curve of Alara's neck, her silver hair spilling over Alara's shoulder. She inhaled, a deep, possessive breath that seemed to draw the very soul from Alara's body. And the world exploded. In the shelter of the Queen's powerful, calming scent, Alara's own fragrance, so long muted and afraid, finally answered. It unfurled. She had felt it. Everyone had. The scent filled the alcove, a testament that silenced every doubt, every jeer from the past 5 years. Without another word to the stunned assembly, Queen Lyra took Alara's hand. Her grip was firm, grounding. Come, she said softly. She turned and began to walk, not back to the throne, but toward the private royal exit behind the tapestry. She did not release Alara's hand. She was taking her. She was claiming her. Alara moved as if in a trance. Her feet barely seemed to touch the floor. She saw the faces of the court as she passed, shock, disbelief, envy, and on Lord Valerius's face a look of pure, impotent rage that was more satisfying than any revenge she could have imagined. They walked through the stunned silence, the Queen's stride confident and sure, Alara's a faltering echo. They passed through the heavy tapestry into a quiet, stone-lined corridor lit by sconces. The cacophony of the gala was instantly muffled, replaced by the sound of their footsteps and the blood roaring in Alara's ears. Her hand was still held in the Queen's. The contact was an anchor in a sea of unreality. They stopped before a heavy oak door. The Queen released her hand only to open it, ushering her inside. It was a private study. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting warm shadows on walls lined with books. The air smelled of old paper, wood smoke, and the clean, sharp scent of pine that was Lyra herself. The Queen closed the door, and the last vestiges of the world outside fell away. It was just the two of them. The silence stretched, no longer the oppressive quiet of the court, but something full of unspoken weight. Alara finally found her voice, a thread of sound. Why? Queen Lyra turned from the door, her regal bearing softened by the firelight. The mask of the monarch was gone. In her eyes, Alara saw the woman. Because I was tired of the cold, she said, her voice raw with a confession that spanned decades. And because courage deserves to be seen, not hidden in the shadows. She took a step toward Alara, then another, until she stood before her once more. She raised her hand and gently brushed a stray tear from Alara's cheek. Alara hadn't even realized she was crying. Your scent, Lyra whispered, her gaze full of wonder. It is not a forgotten song. It is the anthem of a coming storm. Alara's armor was dust. Her resignation was a memory. In their place was a terrifying, brilliant, earth-shattering hope. It was no longer a poison, but the air in her lungs. The bird in her chest was no longer frantic. It was singing. For the first time in 5 years, Alara felt not broken, but whole. And she knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that nothing would ever be the same.